Hello, giraffe. How are you today? Why the long neck? Oh, you've got the SADS, haven't you? Well, why don't we phone a friend and cheer you up? Ring ring. Yes, hello, this is Elephant. Elephant says, oh, hi Giraffe. Would you like to invest in my crypto startup? Well, fuck you twice. Good day. Maybe Elephant's a little busy. Let's see if Tiger has any helpful advice. Ring ring.
Kvojskaš be?
Tiger says,
Opritvam se da se nadrusam. Ne mi zvoni poveće beda te eba, toponar.
Well, that didn't go very well, did it? I bet you feel even more alone now, don't you, Giraffe? You're probably thinking about graduating from weekend roast potato binges to weekday gin tonic benders, aren't you? No, Giraffe, that's not the way. Probably. Now look, the world is awful at times, it really is. The only thing I dislike more than living here is myself. But that's okay, we all get the blues sometimes. It'd be weird not to, considering how strange everything is. Perhaps the real problem is that we've built a culture where we aggressively enforce the idea that confronting the sad truths of the world is unhealthy or weird, despite the fact that we all do it, that we have to. And that actually, at the bottom of it, underneath kind regards and birthday cards, everybody is a total mess. And you should be one too. So there's about 8 billion of us little parasites at the moment, and average life expectancy is around 26,000 days, which means that chances are about 300,000 people are having the worst day of their entire lives today. And isn't it nice not to be one of them? But it will come our turn at some point, of course. And what does one do when one's life falls apart? How the hell would I know? Do I seem like a happy person to you? But we might want to talk about this obscure composer you won't have heard of, who in 1876 wrote to his nephew saying, "Indeed, my life is of little worth to anyone. Were I to vanish from the face of the earth today, it would be no great loss to Russian music." That was actually, fucking Tchaikovsky, easily one of the greatest composers who ever lived. Swan Lake, the Nutcracker, you know the cunt. And yet somehow doubted himself constantly. Or take this writer, a struggling unknown, considered himself hideously ugly and stupid and disliked his work enough he wrote to a friend asking that after his death, all of his stuff was to be burned. He died at 40 from tuberculosis, and his friend ignored his wishes and had his stuff published anyway. The man was, Franz fucking Kafka, one of the greatest writers of last century. Or how about this unknown Mexican painter living in the shadow of her famous lover, convinced of her naivety, sure, she was a failure. Maybe you've heard of her husband, Diego Rivera. You've definitely heard of her though, Frida fucking Kahlo. Today, we would generally know Diego Rivera as her spouse, not the other way around. We love you, Frida. But those were all artists. It'd be a bit suspicious if they weren't all a little bit blah blah, no? Well, how about this American statesman in the 1800s who lost his mother at 9, then his sister at 19, then his 11-year-old son? Himself, he suffered numerous bouts of the SADS, writing once, "I am now the most miserable man living. If what I feel were equally distributed to the whole human family, there would be not one cheerful face on the earth." Wouldn't expect you to know him, that was just Abraham fucking Lincoln. Add to the pile Michelangelo, Florence Nightingale, Beethoven, all of them slipping into periods when they reported they went to a place for a while from which they simply could not find their way back to themselves. The thing is, we only know about their struggles because their lives are well studied. We're not famous, but we get the blues too, of course. And oddly, it turns out that our brains mostly process physical pain and emotional pain in the same regions, and find it rather hard to tell them apart. The SADS actually do hurt. Have you hung out with people after their hearts have been broken? It's like they've been shot. Now, if so many of us go to the bad place in the course of our lives, and if civilization is so old, how come we still don't have an agreed sense of how to combat or even talk properly about the emotional ouchies? We know what to do about dicky tummies and broken legs. Why don't we know how to fix broken souls? Probably because we rarely know how to describe any of this stuff, even to ourselves. English is terrible for talking about complex emotions, especially the sad ones. Other languages are far more specific. For example, Yachaburni, the Arabic for hoping you die before someone you love so you don't have to live without them, or l'esprit de l'escalier, the French for literally the wit of the staircase, for when you think of the perfect comeback you could have said to a joke or an insult but you've already left the party, or cavalieri scaldati, Italian for reheated cabbage, as in trying to restart a relationship that didn't go great last time, it won't this time either, please stop it. But we're lacking for nice things in English too. Cafuné, Portuguese for when you're running your fingers through the hair of someone you rather like, or koi no yokan, Japanese for when you first meet someone and you already suspect that the two of you might be destined to fall in love, And my personal favourite, Waldeinsamkeit, German for the feeling of solitude you get when you're alone in the woods, which isn't supposed to be sad at all, but surely that can also be the worst experience, because there are two modes of being out in the woods, no? There's the old having a map and a plan and a big backpack full of Amsterdam truffles, and then there's the other mode, when you're stuck in the woods, lost at twilight, out of allies, with nothing but a terrible sense that you're never, ever getting out of this place, and you're completely alone in the struggle. To Chinese literature now. Why? Because shut up. And as an introduction, we'll first meet Zhang Zongchang, a 19th century warlord poet who penned such distinguished work as "You tell me to do this, he tells me to do that. You are all bastards. Go fuck your mother." No, this was real, honestly. Or "The sky god is also named Zhang. Why does he make life hard for me? If it doesn't rain in 3 days, I'll demolish your temple. Then I'll have cannons bombard your mum." But let's jump 2,500 years back to 4th century BC China. Lao Tzu is a great scholar who eventually gets tired of the kingdom he's living in and decides to go off and be a hermit, so one story goes anyway. But a guard recognizes him at the city gate as he's trying to leave and says, "I'll only let you through if you write down all of your wisdom." Lao Tzu agrees and knocks out the Tao Te Ching, the founding text of Taoism, a religion still million strong in China, Malaysia and elsewhere today. Now, no one's actually sure if Lao Tzu even existed, it's unlikely, but the Tao Te Ching sure does. Tao literally means the way, or the path, if you like. That is, the unfolding of the universe, more or less. And one of the central questions of the Tao Te Ching is, cosmically, we know sod all about why anything is here, historically, we're often powerless, and in our personal lives, we're strangers even to ourselves sometimes. How the hell are we supposed to live like this? And the Taoist answer, partly, is that we have to give up trying to be masters of everything. Wu Wei, or doing but without striving, abandoning the fantasy of control and accepting that we're not in charge of any destinies, least of all our own. Why do birds migrate? Because they feel like it. Why did I spend all of last Monday drinking mojitos and lying on the floor pretending to be an iggly wiggly squid? Because I wanted to. The universe knows what it's doing, and we are universe anyway. The more we try to impose our will on everything around us, the more futile it all becomes. And so we get wonderful lines like, "Happiness is the absence of striving for happiness," or "The world belongs to those who let go," or "Do you have the patience to wait until your mud settles and the water is clear?" The original Taoists are 2,000 years dead now, but they weren't aliens. They worried about exactly the same stuff we do: grief, political turmoil, and a frustration at having to exist down here. And their reply to all that was fairly novel. We don't live in utopia, we live in a mysterious zoo of bullshit largely beyond our control. The only choice we get is how to react to it all. Now, I waste your time with all this only because the Tao Te Ching is one of the first serious attempts in history to address the horrors of being alive. And it's probably not a coincidence that much of Taoism really got going a few centuries after Lao Tzu, when China fell into the Warring States period, as in 7 very angry states beating the jolly dickens out of each other, constant warfare. And just at the point when everything became fractured, Chinese thinkers began hungering for a mindset to live through the chaos by. It's funny how that happens. Personally or historically, something goes awfully wrong and we end up looking for new ways of seeing. But anyway, it's alright because stuff calmed down and everything went swimmingly after that. Except for over in Europe at that time, Athens is getting pulverized by the Spartans in the Peloponnesian War with thousands dead, but in the aftermath of all that instability, out pops Stoicism, an attempt to simply accept a changing and unpredictable world. If you can't put the fire out, then you may as well toast marshmallows over it. But it's alright because stuff calmed down and everything went swimmingly after that. Except then in 64 AD with the Great Fire of Rome destroying just, 70% of the city. Then 79 AD with Vesuvius the volcano going off and barbecuing thousands of people. Then 165 with the Antonine Plague sweeping through the Roman Empire killing, just 10 million people. But it's alright because stuff calmed down and we're just in time for what's sometimes called the worst year in recorded human history, 536. A mystery fog has just turned up, probably thanks to a volcano going off in Iceland. The fog will last for almost 2 years, turning the sun into more of a cloudy moon. It'll be the coldest decade in 2.5 millennia. Crops start to fail because obviously widespread famine gets going, setting the stage in a few years for the Justinian Plague, which will kill eventually tens of millions. Then 755 and the An Lushan Rebellion begins in China, a civil war that'll would kill around 13 million people. Then the Mongol campaigns, wiping out maybe 40 million people. That's so much murder that it removed maybe 700 million tons of carbon from the atmosphere, enough that we can still see it today in Antarctic ice cores. But it's alright because then 1349, Europe gets to enjoy the Black Death, wiping out millions. But out of that, however, comes humanism, where we begin playing with the idea of relying on human reason and compassion rather than exclusively upstairs heavenly stuff. Then the Spanish conquest of the Americas in the 15th century, millions will die to violence and disease. Then the 30 Years' War in Europe in the 1600s, maybe a mere 8 million dead. But it also partly inspires the Enlightenment, pushing personal autonomy and representative government. Then the Industrial Revolution, bringing in enormous innovation, but also urban poverty, out of which though we'll end up with, among other things, Romanticism and Utopianism. Then the Napoleonic Wars, with millions dead, because of course. Then the First World War kindly dispatches about 50 million people. Then the second installment, killing 70 million this time, out of which though we'll get existentialism and Dadaism and pacifism, and a bunch of other fun flavours of delightfully modern madness. It'd be better not to have the tragedies in the first place, but it is pretty neat how resilient we can be, even as everything goes down the toilet in our own little lives and on the big global stage. And that we know, just as well as our ancestors did, life is cruel and intolerably awful at times, but if one dares to stare directly into the unavoidable abyss of pain, loss and tragedy, the reward at the other end is often new eyes. And maybe beer as well, I don't know, I fucking hope so. But it's alright, because here in the present, stuff has finally calmed down, and everything is definitely going to go just swimmingly from now on. I used to see my neighbour in the lift of my apartment block sometimes. He was about 40 and always disgustingly optimistic. I would tell him how I'd just broken my foot or had my bike stolen, and he'd say something like, "Oh, but that's great, you must have learned so much about yourself." These responses always made me want to go out and purchase very pointy medieval weaponry, and so I started avoiding him. Then, a bit later, I was in the basements of the block storing some stuff and found an old public death notice. And the notice happened to be talking about my neighbour's wife. It turned out she had died a few years before. I stopped avoiding my neighbour after that. His relentless positivity was still sort of irritating, but in it now I saw an incredible quiet strength that I never stopped admiring. Oh no, I thought. Everyone is secretly broken, aren't they? Being a kid is this weird experience of everyone older introducing you to the world. Oh yeah, they say, there's the library, and there's the cinema, and the bakery, and that's the cave of hopeless despair you'll end up in sometimes, where all of your dreams are savagely crushed for no obvious reason. And you say, sorry, what? And they say, oh, and over there is the juice bar. But something happens or nothing happens, and one morning, a little older, you do wake up in the cave, seemingly alone. It's very dark in there, and you wander about for a while, but you can't find the exit. No problem, you think, I've got this compass. But the needle just keeps spinning. No problem, you think, I'll dig my way out. But soon your hands are bloody, so you abandon that. No problem, you think, I'll just wait for rescue. But all you hear are the distant voices of the rest of the world on the beach outside, apparently having a lovely time without you. And so you carve your name into the rock, because what else is there to do here but sit in misery and wait for nothing? But you do come out of the cave again, of course, often with the help of friends, or sometimes via events just as mysterious as those that brought you in here. But you come out of despair and fall back into the world, and hopefully everything is fine once more. Strangely though, perhaps a while later, you pop back to the cave out of curiosity, but with a torch this time, and find that your name was not the only signature on the wall. There were hundreds of signatures of everyone you've ever known, millions from all the others who did their lonely time in here as well. Because it would be odd to go an entire life without occasionally losing the plot. It would be weird to live as a talking primate, knowing just enough to know that we know basically nothing, surrounded by disasters, losing people forever as we do, and not have a bit of a fucking wobble now and then. It isn't amazing so much chaos and suffering has happened across history. Rather, it's amazing that it happened and we're still here, still being decent sometimes. That in spite of all the horrors, we still came up with democracy and aspirin and winter fashion for cats. That we continue in the face of loss and despair. And because of that, because we continue, a while from now we get to stand on the high cliff looking out on the warm day with all of our wisdom as we experience yet another feeling we don't have a word for in English, énouement. The strange sense at having arrived now in the future and wishing you could tell your past self that everything will be okay. Because it will be. Until the next time you take a little vacation in the cave of despair perhaps, and another version of you waits quietly ahead in the future, having braved those hard times as well, so that you can return back to yourself once again, as we always do.